At the Turning Point USA 2019 Student Action Summit, we sit down with Will Chamberlain, the editor-in-chief of Human Events, to discuss the vision behind his publication and why he thinks the government might be able to step in to curtail censorship of conservatives on college campuses. Will Chamberlain, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Absolutely, great to be here.
So, I guess 5 or so months ago, you took on the helm as editor-in-chief of Human Events.
Yeah, no, it's been a great ride.
So tell me, what are you up to? What is the editorial vision?
So we're trying to do very high-end commentary, editorial commentary, from a pro-Trump nationalist conservative perspective. And I think that that's not really happening in a lot of places. There are a few places I really like The American Mind at the Claremont Institute. But in general, like the old school magazines, places like National Review, they don't really have a consistently nationalist outlook. And so we're trying to do that and really elevate the prose level on our side.
So the nationalist sort of in juxtaposition to globalist?
Yeah, I would say so. Imperialist, however you want to look at it. But we're very much, we don't see it as either neoconservative or isolationist, right? So the neoconservatives want to do regime change wars everywhere. We're very much in opposition to that. But we're talking seriously about what should America do in Mexico to deal with the serious crisis there and how that impacts us from our own national security perspective. Similarly, we want to talk about how to confront China, which is a rising great power to our own great power. And we don't see those, we see doing things, using foreign policy to engage both China and Mexico is very much in America's national interest and thus part of a nationalist project.
So it's very interesting, very often you see nationalism and isolationism equated to the point where even when I think about it, and I know that these are not the same things, they kind of conflate in my mind. And this is, am I right? How does this work?
It's often characterized that way by neoconservatives so as to justify intervention, but it's just not true. Yoram Hazony wrote a really great book, The Virtue of Nationalism, where he talked about nationalism as being a sort of seeking a respective nation-state global order, but also looking out for the national interests of your country. And so while it would be obvious that a nationalist would want to make sure that China's values don't dominate in America, by the same token, it would say that regime change wars are bad on the other hand. And it doesn't mean that the right answer to every foreign policy program is to simply, stop intervening or retreat. That's just not how we look at the world.
Oh, interesting. So by China's values, you're talking about Chinese Communist Party here,
exactly,
right?
The Chinese Communist Party. It's pretty obvious that their values don't even respect free speech in the slightest. They have a giant firewall on the internet. That's very incompatible with how Americans view the world. When it comes to things like basic human rights, the way that they are treating their Muslim population in Xinjiang is completely anathema to Americans. We've had a massive debate over whether it's okay to restrict immigration from certain Arab countries due to problems on their own end in terms of vetting people. They're putting people in camps to re-educate them. There's a wide difference between what China's values are broadly and where even the debate is between left and right in America.
No, absolutely, and obviously this is something we're acutely aware of
right.
here at the Epoch Times. So, talking about free speech, you actually have, I know, a lot of thoughts about the issue of free speech and beyond on campus, where
Absolutely.
there are these battles that are taking place.
Yeah. It's obvious that the university system is not particularly protective of free speech anymore. We can force them to if they're public universities by going to the courts because the First Amendment governs them and makes them give people a place to speak. But in general, they're not promoting any sort of culture of free speech, nor are they protecting ideological diversity, conservatism on campuses. And one of my big projects is to make the conservative movement much more adversarial towards college campuses and universities and be willing to use government power to push on them so that they are not factories of Marxism anymore. So I coined something that is a bit hyperbolic, as happens, called Seize the Endowments, which is the idea that if the universities are not acting in our interests and are leaving kids hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and not clearly better off, that the answer might be to take their endowments and use them to cover the student loans of the kids who have been effectively defrauded.
Doesn't that like trigger the libertarian in you?
Right, I mean, there are constitutional issues here, right? Seizing private property without due process has certain, Fifth Amendment issues. But at the same time, I think it's important to sort of have a stance, an attitude towards the university system, the same way Democrats have towards coal companies. The conservative movement should treat universities. Maybe you should exist, maybe. We'll negotiate that.
So it's a pretty extreme position. So factories of Marxism. I think that's what you said.
Yeah, and I think that's accurate. And there's another point too, which is that conservatives have been fighting for free speech on college campuses for decades, especially very hard in the last decade.
Right.
And there's plenty of entities that do that and litigate it in the courts and do very noble work. But things are getting worse. They're not getting better. The culture on college campuses gets worse and worse and worse for conservative students, and it gets harder and harder to be a conservative on a college campus. And conservatives are half the country, and we're helping fund these institutions. That should change. They should be much more friendly to us. I mean, maybe they need a 10-year moratorium on hiring anybody who's voted Democrat for a professorial position to, redress the imbalance.
That's kind of interesting. So you're kind of suggesting taking the affirmative action concept and applying it to conservatives.
Sure. I'm always open to using liberal ideas and progressive causes in ways that maybe progressives wouldn't like very much. In the social media context, I use the idea that platform access should be a civil right. The idea that private companies shouldn't be able to abridge your ability to use a Facebook or a Twitter or a massive social media platform, because that's integral to your ability to express yourself, to exercise your First Amendment rights. And so in the college context, I'm perfectly willing to use civil rights laws and affirmative action ideas to explain to them that we may use government power to make you more friendly to conservatives or to, limit your ability to attract students if you are going to treat conservatives with such contempt.
It's a very interesting question about these giant platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, and who have effectively become the public square, yet they're private,
Right. And I think an old kind of libertarian conservative would say, oh, well, they're private companies, they can do whatever they want. Well, doing whatever they want is shutting down conservative speech and hurting conservatives' ability to win an election. So that seems like a self-defeating principle to me. I don't believe in self-defeating principles for conservatives. And I think we should be willing to use government power both towards universities and towards social media companies to make sure that they aren't, if they're going to act so adversarially to the conservative movement, we should be willing to use government power to threaten their interests.
So this is really interesting. So basically, this philosophy that you're describing, that's essentially, is that the editorial direction of Human Events now?
The best one is we actually ran an article called Against Peacetime Conservatism, and that comes from The Godfather, the idea of a peacetime consigliere and why they got rid of Tom Hagen if you're a film nerd. But the idea being that in an environment like 2019, where the left does not view conservatism as a legitimate political viewpoint, and its end goal is to see it extinguished effectively, it's not a peacetime environment, and as a result, I think that conservatives being practical and pragmatic and using government power to win the culture war is something that we should be doing, even if it contradicts libertarian principles.
And just define the culture war for me briefly.
That's a challenging question. It begins with, it's the essentially war of ideology that exists throughout academia, the media, and social media, and just in terms of in politics, and that manifests itself in the way that how you're treated in the workplace, what it's like to be on a college campus, what it's like to be a conservative on the internet, and the ability and how it's almost how politics seeps into the daily lives of individuals, where you're in the culture war when your political beliefs are getting you fired from your job or harassed on a college campus.
I see.
It's inductive.
Yes. Yeah. So you're kind of defining it inductively here.
Right. Yeah. I don't have some a priori definition of the culture war, but it's like that. What the Supreme Court said about pornography, you know it when you see it. So you do know you're in the culture war when you're getting canceled or something like that.
So, but you told me offline a little earlier that you're relatively new to conservatism in the first place. And,
I only came around, I would say, to conservatism as such in 2013, 2014. Before that, I'd probably have classified myself as a libertarian. But I think, eventually you sort of evolve on issues. The libertarian solution is just not persuasive when it comes to a number of major issues facing the right more broadly. I mean, libertarians oppose socialism but support open borders in many cases. If you have open borders, you're not going to get socialism. It's pretty obvious.
If you have open borders,
if you have open borders, you're going to get socialism.
Oh, okay,
rather.
okay, I got you.
Good correction. Good correction.
Yeah, okay, understand. And why? That's a broad sweeping
right,
statement,
but I mean,
right?
an immigration from of low-skilled workers, of people who are not well off, those people are going to be more attracted towards policies that transfer wealth. That's going to inevitably lead towards more socialism. Being careful about immigration policy is necessary to avoid socialism because we live in a democracy.
Fascinating. So what's next for Human Events?
I mean, the very first thing, we're just trying to put out consistently high-quality content and more of it as we get better. I'm new to media, right? I was a lawyer by training.
Right.
I only took on the editor-chief job at the end of July. And so I'm new to all sorts of different things, and I'm just trying to get my arms around the business of running a media outlet. But we're trying to, on the one hand, put out really good content that does well on social media, and on the other hand, also we see as a part of our project using social media and Twitter and Facebook, not just to spread our articles, but to push out ideas and work with influencers to amplify the messages that we think need to be heard.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.